She asked me to meet her at the bar where we first fell in love, and that's where she told me everything, like ripping my heart out in the very place it began. I had that tight feeling in my gut as I pulled into the parking lot of the Dusty Spur. My wife, her name's Lisa, had asked me to meet her there at 3 p.m. sharp. Now, I knew full well that a bar like that would be nearly deserted at that hour. This wasn't going to be a casual happy hour or a surprise celebration. Whatever she needed to say, it wasn't going to be easy. And I didn't realize just how right I was. The Dusty Spur wasn't just any bar. It was the place where Lisa and I first crossed paths over a decade ago, back when life felt lighter and love still had that shine to it. 13 years ago to be exact. So yeah, when she picked that place for a random Tuesday afternoon chat, I already had a sinking feeling. I was convinced she was going to come clean about something I'd been dreading for months, that she was seeing someone else. Someone from work, maybe. There had been signs, the kind that don't slap you in the face all at once but slowly pile up until you can't ignore them anymore. Late nights at the office had become routine. Lisa worked as a personal assistant to one of the higher-ups at her company, and those emergency deadlines were happening far too often. Our intimacy? Practically non-existent. When we did connect, she seemed disinterested, distracted, like she was somewhere else entirely. And the clothes? That was another red flag. New, bold outfits started showing up in her closet. Stylish, even a bit daring. But she never wore them around me. Not once. She'd leave the house dressed to the nines and come home like she'd spent the evening somewhere far from a spreadsheet or a desk job. What hurt even more, though, was how she'd begun to distance herself from the kids. Our twins, Mason and Molly, just turned 10. Dinner had turned into a quiet routine, just me and the kids, night after night. Lisa would come home late, maybe drop off a carton of ice cream or a store-bought pie for the kids, smile like that made everything okay, and head to the bedroom. No conversation. No presence. Just absence with excuses. So yeah, when I pulled into that nearly empty lot at the Spur, I'd already run every possible scenario through my head. I was ready to hear the truth, whatever that meant. I'd overheard part of a phone conversation a couple nights before that stuck with me like a thorn. Her voice, low but urgent. Yes, okay, Tuesday. I'll get him there. Well, it was Tuesday. And it was 3 o'clock. And just like she said, she got me there. I stayed in the car a few extra minutes. Couldn't help but wonder, what if she was already in there with the guy? What if he was sitting right next to her, smug as anything? I started to feel my hands ball up into fists, my mind racing with what I might say or do. Then I heard my dad's voice in my head, calm and steady like always. He'd passed a few years back, but the lessons he taught me still rang loud. Don't act unless you know what you're doing, he told me once. Keep quiet, son. Don't let your emotions speak for you. The less you say, the more they worry. If they don't worry, they're blind, and that's your advantage. Speak later once you've got the full picture. But when you do, make it count. That advice had gotten me through plenty in business. My company, Turner Systems, I started it a decade ago, specializes in electrical schematics and wiring solutions. We serve a dozen construction firms now. My days are packed. I've always taken pride in building something from scratch. I just never thought I'd have to apply that same strategic patience to my marriage. I took a deep breath, nodded toward the sky, and silently thanked my dad for showing up when I needed him most. Then I stepped out of the truck and headed inside. She was already at the bar. And yes, she wasn't alone. Sitting beside her was a man I didn't recognize. Clean-cut, maybe a few years younger than me. But honestly, that didn't surprise me. I barely knew anyone at her workplace. Between my own demanding schedule and the kids, we didn't mix social circles much. Still, seeing her with him, it hit me harder than I expected. I stepped inside and sure enough, there she was, Lisa, seated at the bar with the man I didn't recognize. As I made my way toward them, she must have sensed me coming because she turned around before I even reached the counter. "Hey Jake," she said, calm and collected. No, "Hi sweetheart," no kiss on the cheek, just flat, formal, like she was talking to an old coworker instead of her husband of 11 years. "Hey babe," I replied, leaning into the word just enough to let her know I caught the coldness in her voice. "So, what's going on?" That's when the guy next to her turned to face me, all confident like he'd been rehearsing his lines. "Mr. Dawson, or would you rather I call you Jake?" he asked. "We asked you here today to be honest with you. Lisa and I have been involved for a while now. She's told me she's done sneaking around and making excuses. I encouraged her to come clean." I stood there motionless. Truth be told, I wasn't shocked. I'd seen this coming. The hidden phone calls, the distance, the late nights. I'd already braced myself for this moment. What they didn't know was that I had a little recorder tucked inside the inside pocket of my jacket, rolling quietly. I figured if this was going to happen, I might as well have proof. Just in case. I kept my mouth shut. Said nothing. My father's voice echoed in my head again. Don't speak unless you know exactly what you want to say. Let them fill the silence. And so I did. Lisa looked at me, waiting for a reaction. When she didn't get one, she seemed to take my silence as shock, or maybe submission, and decided to take over. Jake, she started, her voice trembling a little, it's been hard keeping this secret from you. I never wanted to hurt you. And I'm not planning to leave you. It's just, the connection I have with Tyler is, well, it's something I can't give up. I need it, and I hope you can understand. You deserve to know the truth. I looked at her, and in that moment, I realized something that hadn't fully registered until then. She actually believed this made sense. Lisa never finished college, mostly because she got caught up in our life together. But I never thought of her as foolish, until right then. As for Tyler? This guy wasn't exactly oozing brilliance. That much was obvious. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked toward the other end of the bar. The bartender was trying to look busy, but it was clear he'd heard more than he wanted to. I gave him a nod. What's on tap today? I asked casually. He slid me a glass and I took a sip, letting the silence do the talking. I didn't even glance back at them, but I could feel their eyes tracking my every move, trying to figure out what I was thinking, what I was going to do next. I finished my beer, stood up, and walked out without a word. And let me tell you, walking out of that bar without giving them a single inch of satisfaction felt better than anything I'd felt in months. I don't know if it was pride, clarity, or just plain relief, but for the first time in a long while, I felt in control again. The sun hit my face as I stepped outside and I made my way straight home. I knew Mason and Molly would be waiting. When I got back, the kids came running. I kissed them on the forehead, smiled big, and said, "Guess what? We're gonna have a great weekend." They lit up, laughing and cheering, and the three of us hopped in the car to grab some ice cream. And for a little while, everything felt normal again, maybe even a little better than normal. Later that evening, I sat Mason and Molly down and told them about the plan I'd come up with earlier that day. They were going to spend the weekend with their Aunt Susan and Uncle Dak. Now, that wasn't out of the ordinary. They absolutely adored my sister and her husband. Honestly, those two had been like a second set of parents to them. Sue and Dak had tried for years to have kids of their own, but it just never happened. So when Mason and Molly came into the picture, they poured all that love into them. Spoiled them rotten in the best way. Camping trips, s'mores by the fire, ghost stories, they had a bond that made it easy for me to let them go for a couple days. And that weekend I needed the space. I needed time to take care of what had to be done. As I helped load their bags into Dak's truck, he looked over at me with that quiet, no-nonsense expression of his. The guy was a former Army Ranger and probably the calmest man I've ever known. "You good, Jake?" he asked, not pressing, just observing. He had this uncanny ability to see right through the smoke. "Not really," I admitted, shaking my head. "I'm filing for divorce." Dak didn't say anything right away, just gave me a firm nod that said more than words could. "I think I've got it under control," I added, more for myself than him. "It won't be clean, but I've got what I need. This state doesn't exactly believe in clean slates when there's blame involved, and I've got proof." He gave me another look. Not pity, just understanding. The kind you get from someone who's seen his share of battles. "After I leave here, I'm heading to see Henry." Henry Morgan was my company's legal guy. I'd known him for years. He'd been handling my business affairs since I first got Turner Systems off the ground. The man looked like he should have retired 20 years ago, but he was still sharper than most lawyers half his age. Everyone in the city knew him. Judges, DAs, other firms, he had connections, and more importantly, he had experience. I trusted him completely. Lisa had no idea what I was capable of when I was focused. Sure, if push came to shove, I'd split things down the middle. But with the evidence I had, thanks to that recorder, Henry said I had the upper hand. In this state, that mattered. A lot. And if Henry said it, you could take it to the bank. I was actually starting to feel lighter, more in control. Maybe for the first time in months. As I drove back home, knowing the kids were off safe and happy, I realized this might be the final weekend I'd spend under the same roof as my wife. Well, soon-to-be ex. When I pulled into the driveway, I hit the brakes. A car I didn't recognize was parked outside. Didn't take much brain power to figure out who it belonged to. It had to be Tyler. It was already getting dark, and I caught myself wondering, half bitter, half curious, if I'd be lucky enough to catch him inside. But instead of storming in, I waited. Something told me it might be better to let this play out, to watch. I stayed in my truck, sipping coffee and thinking until about 10 minutes later the front door opened and Lisa stepped outside. She walked over to the porch and sat down beside me. "You okay?" she asked, her voice unusually gentle. I didn't answer. I just took another slow sip of my coffee and stared out at the yard. I was waiting for her to say something real. Something honest. But what really hit me harder than I expected was that she didn't even ask where the kids were. Didn't seem to notice or care that the house was empty without them. And that's when it clicked. This woman sitting next to me wasn't the same person I'd married. Not anymore. Lisa and I had been married for over a decade. That used to mean something to me, used to carry weight. But by now it just felt like a technicality. A long chapter nearing its end. "We need to talk, Jake," she said that night, her voice a little unsure. "The kids are at my sister's, just so you know." I nodded, barely reacting. "Yeah." I noticed the house was quiet when I got home. She looked thrown off, maybe expecting me to ask questions or get emotional. But I'd already done all that in my own time, and I had no intention of showing my hand now. We were sitting in the bar again. Yes, the same place where she dropped the bomb on me the first time. But this night had a strange energy to it. The music was low, the lighting dim, and in the far corner, I noticed something that made me smirk without meaning to. There he was, Tyler. The very same guy Lisa had told me she couldn't give up. And guess what? He was locked in with some other woman, kissing her like no one else in the room existed. I glanced toward Lisa and back at him. So the guy she thought was worth destroying a marriage over was cheating on her. Or maybe that was just his thing and she already knew. Maybe they had that kind of understanding. Honestly, I didn't care anymore. A man at the bar leaned over and whispered, "If you ever need a witness, man, I got you." I gave him a quick nod. "Thanks. Might take you up on that." He nodded solemnly. My ex did the same thing. Only difference is I didn't have anyone on my side. I left them both there in that bar and went home. Lisa followed not long after, acting like everything was fine. Like we were still a team. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said sweetly the next day, stirring a skillet on the stove. "Smells good in here, right?" It did. I was hungry. And even if this was the last day of our marriage, I wasn't about to sulk my way through it. The storm would come tomorrow, but today? Today was going to be a good day. "I'll be around all day if you need anything," she added, almost like she deserved a thank you for it. Like being present in our house was some kind of favor to me. She smiled. I smiled back. But mine wasn't real. Back in my office, I sat there for a long time just thinking. Wondering. How did I end up here? I had married this woman, given her everything, and now I was watching her throw it all away with the subtlety of a train wreck. I started to doubt myself for a second. Not the decision, just the logic of it. Was she even fully aware of what she was doing? Could someone really be this careless, this clueless, and still be held accountable? But then that bitterness hit me again, the kind you feel when someone doesn't just betray you but parades it around like a badge. The coldness, the kids she barely acknowledged anymore. No, that kind of selfishness was not something you forgive. And with that, I stood up, grabbed the folder, and left the house. There was still something important left to do. Later that morning, I arrived at the office building where Lisa worked, more specifically the office where her boss worked. As I stepped through the lobby, I passed by a guy who didn't know me and I didn't know him. Just a regular delivery man doing his job. He walked right into her office like he had done it 100 times before. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Lisa Dawson?" he asked. Lisa turned away from a nearby server and smiled politely. "Yes, that's me." She didn't see me. I was standing just outside the doorway in the shadow of the hallway. He handed her a large manila envelope and said, "You've been served." Her face froze. She stared at the envelope for a moment, like it might vanish if she didn't blink. She opened it slowly. As she scanned the contents, the blood drained from her face. Her hand trembled. Then she gasped, and within seconds she collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't move, didn't speak, and I didn't feel good about it, but I did feel done. The day after everything came crashing down, the bar, the serving papers, the whole public unraveling, I agreed to meet Lisa one last time. Not because I wanted to, but because I had something I needed to give her. Something that would close the door completely. I knew the risk. I figured she'd try to cry, plead, lean on old memories. Maybe she'd even bring up the kids to try to strike a nerve. But this time I was ready for it. "Jake, isn't there some way?" she asked, her voice soft, desperate. "I mean, what about the kids?" There it was. I saw it coming a mile away. "You haven't cared about Mason or Molly for months, Lisa," I said, not raising my voice, just laying it out flat. "Tyler's been your whole world lately." He's a good man, she replied quickly. He reminds me of you in some ways. I think, maybe that's part of why I fell for him. That made me wince, not because it hurt but because it was pathetic. She was still trying to spin it into something noble. Like there was depth in what she did. Let me give you something, I said, sliding a thick manila envelope across the table between us. Just take a look. Start with the dates at the bottom. She opened the folder and pulled out the stack of glossy photographs. Clear, damning shots of Tyler, the so-called love of her life, with some other woman. Saturday night. Handsy, drunk, lips on her neck. Same night she was home telling me how she wanted to fix things. Her face changed as she flipped through them. But, these are from this weekend. That's right, I said. You were never his one and only, Lisa. You were just convenient. He's a player. Always was. I stood up, tossed a 20 on the table for the waitress, and without another word walked out. She was crying by then, head bowed, tears streaming down her face. But I didn't feel vindicated. I felt done. That evening around 9 p.m. I was back at home feeling surprisingly okay. Not happy exactly. Just settled. Like the worst was finally over. I turned to Rachel, a woman I'd started quietly seeing since the separation. Nothing serious, not yet, but she was kind and calm and I appreciated her company. I smiled and said in a low voice, "What do you say, babe? Feel like making tonight a little more interesting?" She glanced up from the novel she was reading and gave me a tired smile. "Not tonight," she said gently. "I just want to relax and finish this chapter. Could offer you a massage. Shoulders, maybe back?" I tried, keeping it playful. She chuckled. "Jake, you just want to get me out of this robe. I know your tricks. And it's not going to work, not tonight." I leaned back and raised my hands in surrender. Fair enough. But later that week I got hit with something else. Beth wasn't Lisa. She was someone I'd dated years before Lisa came along. A brief, messy chapter in my life. She had this way of reappearing when things were already hard enough. And apparently she'd heard through the grapevine about my divorce. She left more than 100 messages on my phone and my office line that day. Not exaggerating, actual triple digits. Around lunchtime she started emailing. That's when I blocked her. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need her saying how sorry she was. She'd turned toxic over the last few months of our old relationship, and I wasn't going to let that leak into my life again. For a while Lisa and I had barely been intimate. Maybe once every couple weeks and only after I practically begged or guilt her into it. There was always a reason. Tired, stressed, not in the mood. I told myself it was a phase. That it would pass. But when I confronted her, when I finally asked if there was someone else, what got me most wasn't denial. It was her reaction. She didn't even look scared or guilty. She looked surprised. Like I'd hit a nerve she thought I'd never find. That's when I started doing research. I went online, typed in home surveillance cameras, and watched as 10,000 options popped up. I narrowed it down, filter by filter, until I found exactly what I needed. Something discreet with a wireless feed and built-in recording. Something I could monitor from a distance just to be sure. I was done playing the fool. One way or another I was going to get to the truth. Around the same time our neighborhood had one of its monthly BBQs, 8 couples rotating houses potluck style. This time it was being hosted by Dick and his wife. I figured I'd still go. Smile, bring something warm for the table, act like life was normal. Because if I'd learned anything through this whole mess, it was that sometimes the best way to expose the truth is to stay quiet and let people show you exactly who they are. "I refuse," I said, laying the sarcasm on thick. Lisa and I had gone to the neighborhood gathering together that Saturday night, but if you'd watched us, you'd think we were complete strangers. She kept her distance the entire time, never once sitting near me, never touching my hand, not even a shared glance. It was like I didn't exist. Later that night, after the neighbors had gone home, I took Mason and Molly upstairs, got them into their pajamas and tucked them in. I read them a quick bedtime story, gave each a kiss on the forehead, and turned off the lights while Lisa cleaned up the kitchen downstairs. When I came back down I flipped on the living room TV. Didn't care what was on, I just needed noise in the background. And I waited. I didn't even know what I was waiting for, but I knew something was coming. And then she walked in. My jaw nearly hit the floor. She was wearing this black and scarlet red outfit, barely enough fabric to call it clothing. It was the kind of thing that was supposed to scream seduction, but all it did was make my stomach turn. She wasn't wearing it for me. She hadn't dressed up like that for me in years. And I knew exactly why. What she didn't know was that I had already heard the recording. She must have forgotten how easily tech can turn against you. I had him hooked before we even got to the bedroom, she giggled on the phone. He couldn't keep his hands off me. I was going to let him do whatever he wanted. Just once in a while, that's all it takes. The sound of her voice, paired with the laughter on the other end of the call, made me sick. She was talking about me like I was some clueless idiot she was managing, not the man she promised to love and honor. I figured he wouldn't notice, she continued. It's been so long since we really connected, I doubt he even remembers what it used to feel like. She was right about one thing, I had forgotten what it used to feel like. Because whatever we had, it was gone. Replaced by performance and strategy. After that, my mind turned to figuring out the last missing piece. Who was the guy? I sat down with a pad of paper and wrote out a list. Our usual group of neighborhood friends. 8 couples, all close, all familiar. We rotated hosting backyard BBQs and potlucks every month. They were people I laughed with, shared beers with, confided in. But someone in that circle had crossed a line. At first glance, I didn't want to believe it. These were our friends. My friends. I'd known most of them for over 3 years. No way someone in that group would betray me like this. Right? Wrong. My pen hovered over the list. Donna and Chris were first. Nice people but distant. They were the kind who liked to remind everyone of their new kitchen renovation or their trip to the Bahamas. Chris in particular was kind of a pompous guy, always throwing around money, always acting like he was the smartest guy in the room. Lisa seemed to laugh at his jokes a little harder than mine lately. Maybe it was the money she liked. Or maybe it was something else. Donna and Chris never seemed to connect with each other. Always on different wavelengths. Something about them felt off. I circled Chris's name. Looking at the list again, I started narrowing it down. Carl? Probably not. Too quiet. Andy? No way, he was closer to Lisa's dad in age. Plus, he and his wife were inseparable. That left one name that kept gnawing at the back of my mind. Rick. Rick and his wife Hannah were our next-door neighbors. Early 30s, same age as us. Always smiling, always helpful. The perfect couple, everyone admired. Rick was my buddy. We watched football together. He helped me change my brakes last summer. But something had changed. After the party that night, Rick and Hannah stayed a little longer to help us clean up. That wasn't unusual. Rick was the helpful type. Always had been. But that night, something about him was different. His body language. The way he avoided eye contact. Good party, huh? He said as he passed me a trash bag. I smiled and nodded. But inside, a storm was starting to brew. Because if it was Rick, if it was him, then this betrayal ran deeper than anything I'd prepared for. It wasn't just my wife stepping out. It was a knife in the back from someone I'd called a friend. The morning after the neighborhood barbecue, I decided to start asking a few quiet questions. I figured I'd ease into it, see what I could dig up without sounding like I was chasing ghosts. Hey Dick, I asked casually as we packed up the last of the folding chairs. Everyone seemed to have a good time last night? He let out a laugh. Oh yeah, especially Andy. You didn't see it, huh? He smirked and leaned in like he was sharing a secret. Betty gave him a pretty good elbow to the ribs after his 3rd beer. Told him if he got drunk again she'd leave him at the curb. Guys always towing the line. We both laughed a little, then Dick added with a wink, but if you think I'm gonna call around asking who's been fooling around with your wife, you're out of luck, buddy. I've got better things to do with my Saturday night. If you know what I mean. I forced a smile. Dick wasn't the guy. Shouldn't have even been on my list if I'm honest. He was too blunt, too simple. And too faithful to Betty, who didn't let anything slide. I crossed his name off in my head. That left Andy and Chris. Both seemed unlikely. Andy was sloppy but harmless. Chris was arrogant but too self-absorbed to bother with Lisa. I was running out of suspects. My thoughts started spinning again. And then it hit me. It was 3 a.m. and I was lying there staring at the ceiling when the pieces clicked into place. Carl from work. It made too much sense. He was around Lisa more than I'd realized. Meetings, projects, social mixers. I'd overlooked him because he was quiet, kept to himself. But that's often the type people don't see coming. And Lisa had mentioned him once or twice. Too casually. I remembered overhearing part of a phone conversation earlier that week. Lisa giggling, saying something about not having to sneak around anymore. It'll be nice to finally take our time, she said. You can just come over after the kids leave for school. We'll have the whole house. Then she laughed again. It feels so naughty. Especially when Steve and I used to, and I turned off the recording. I'd heard enough. I couldn't sleep after that. My thoughts bounced between disgust and planning. Not just heartbreak now, but the anger that comes from knowing people took advantage of your trust and thought you'd never find out. I wasn't proud of the next thought, but it came all the same. They deserved to pay. And no, I didn't go off the rails. I didn't do anything stupid. But I did decide to be smart about it. There was a part of town where people went when they needed to disappear or get information. I didn't go there often. No one did unless they had a reason. But that night I had one. I put on an old work shirt, beat-up jeans, hopped into my company's utility truck, and drove across town. I wasn't sure what I was looking for at first. Maybe a number. A name. Somebody who knew somebody. I figured there were ways to expose Carl without getting my hands dirty. I sat in a diner just off 14th Street, one of those late-night spots where everything smells like old coffee and bad decisions. I pulled out a legal pad, flipped it open, and started sketching out a plan. The goal wasn't to destroy Carl's life. Not exactly. But I needed to make sure the people around him knew the kind of man he really was. And Lisa too. I figured the truth would be enough. By the next morning, I'd already contacted a private investigator I found through a guy at work. Discreet. Licensed. Professional. Cost me a few $100 up front, but it was worth it. I gave him the name, Carl Hastings. Address. License plate number. I want everything, I said. Photos, texts, emails, whatever you can legally dig up. The guy nodded. You'll have something solid in a week. I left feeling calmer than I had in days. I didn't need to break the law. I didn't need revenge out of a bottle or a back alley. I just needed the truth laid out cleanly and clearly, like evidence in a courtroom. Because when the time came, I wasn't going to scream or shout or beg. I was going to let the facts speak for themselves. After I hung up, I sat there gripping the wheel, waiting, heart racing, and steady. Carl had no idea what was coming. We drove for what felt like forever, him in his pickup, me trailing 2 cars back. I'd planted the seed. Now I was watching the roots take hold. Just before he reached the exit for Home Depot, a squad car lit up behind him. I slowed down and turned off onto a side street, watching from a distance. A second patrol car pulled in behind the first. 2 cruisers. That was more than routine. The first officer approached Carl's window, likely giving him the standard spiel about his broken taillight. A minute later, Carl stepped out, clearly confused, and walked around the back with the cop. Then the second officer popped open his trunk and brought out a K9 unit. That's when I knew the gears had turned. That quiet little plan I'd started putting together a week ago? It was in motion now. And Carl? He was in trouble. I turned off the street and drove away slowly, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. I hadn't expected to feel so calm. But maybe that's what happens when you've already cried all the tears and burned through all the rage. What's left is precision. At our next neighborhood get-together, the jokes flew. The whispers. Carl was the talk of the evening. Everyone was laughing. Well, everyone except me and my sister, Susan. She didn't come and I didn't blame her. The whole thing felt dirty. That night, I moved to the second part of the plan. It didn't require much. Just timing. Beth showed up at the party, acting like everything was normal, even after the Carl news had spread. She was wearing one of those forced smiles. I watched her from across the patio, laughing too loud, pretending too hard. She had no idea I knew everything. Later that night, after most folks had left, I confronted her. You okay? I asked, handing her a fresh drink. You seem a little off tonight. She shrugged. It's just, the Carl thing. I can't believe it. Arrested? I mean, what are the odds? Yeah, I said, pausing just long enough. Weird world, isn't it? When I told her I'd forgotten the salad she made for the party, and that I was probably too buzzed to drive back and get it, she rolled her eyes and got annoyed, like she always did when things didn't revolve around her. Oh, for crying out loud, Jake, she muttered. Just let me grab my purse and I'll go. She was out the door in 2 minutes, keys in hand. 20 minutes later, I got the call. Beth had been pulled over on her way home. Driving under the influence. Possession of illegal substances. I showed up at the station with my best look of shock and confusion. Wait, what? I said. Beth? No. She doesn't even touch that stuff. There's gotta be some mistake. The officer just shook his head. We'll sort it out. But right now she's being booked. Do you need me to call someone for the kids? They're with my mom tonight, I replied, playing the part. But sure, I'll call her. We'll figure this out. Susan met me in the parking lot later, confused and hurting. Jake, there's no way. This has to be some sort of mix-up. Beth wouldn't do that. I looked at her and for the first time in weeks I told her the truth. She would. And she has. That night, with the kids sound asleep at my mom's place, I went home and rewatched the recordings from the past week. The ones from the house. From the bedroom. from the hallway where I'd hidden the second camera behind the air vent. What I saw confirmed everything I already knew. Beth and Carl hadn't just had a fling. They'd been in a full-blown affair, daytime visits, whispered conversations, stolen moments right under my nose. And the worst part wasn't the sex. It wasn't even the lies. It was what she said when she thought I'd never hear her. You know, Carl? Jake's so dull now. Like a piece of furniture. He barely notices anything. I feel like I'm living with a ghost. That line hit harder than the betrayal itself. Because the woman I had loved for years, who once begged me for forever, had reduced me to something in the way. And now, she was finally out of mine. There's only so much a man can watch before something inside him gives way. I'd reviewed enough of the footage to confirm everything I needed, but when I saw Beth begging Carl to do the same disgusting things she used to say made her sick. That was the last straw. I turned it off. I felt sick. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd mocked everything I thought we had. Later that day I called her parents, June and Hank, and asked if I could stop by to talk. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but they deserved to hear the truth from me, not through whispers or a phone call from the sheriff's office. We sat down in their quiet living room. June's hands were folded in her lap. Hank leaned forward like he was bracing for impact. I need to tell you something, I said, keeping my voice even. Beth's been arrested. DUI and drug possession. But that's not the worst of it. I slid a flash drive across the table. There's footage, I said. I thought everything was getting better. I was wrong. I'm divorcing her. June looked like the floor had dropped out beneath her. Steve, can't you two go to counseling or something? She asked, her voice soft, barely above a whisper. You've been through so much. You love each other, right? Maybe in time. No, I cut in. You need to watch the tape. After you do, ask yourself this. If that was your spouse, could you forgive them? Hank reached for the flash drive and gave a small nod. I understand, he said, his voice tight. Do what you have to do. I also wanted you to know, I added, I'm not posting her bail. It's $33,000. She can sit with the consequences for once. They didn't argue. I handed June the business card of my lawyer. If you're thinking about helping her, he's good. He said he'd offer you a discount if you needed legal help. June looked down at the card but said nothing. I could tell she wasn't really hearing me anymore. And honestly, I didn't expect her to. Beth's not here, Hank said after a long pause. But she's got nowhere else to go when she gets out. I don't even want her coming here. I appreciate you listening, I said quietly as I got up to leave. That night, the storm began. Beth called the house phone over and over again. Then my cell. I let most of them go to voicemail just to see what she had to say. I'm sorry, she cried in the first message. It wasn't even my idea. Carl came on to me. I didn't want it to go that far. In the second, those drugs weren't mine, Steve. You know I'm not like that. And in the third, please just give me a chance to explain. Please. But I'd heard enough. The next day, Susan, my sister, called to tell me she'd kicked Carl out. Threw his clothes and tools into the garage and slapped him with a restraining order. He came by once to pick up his stuff. That was it. He lost everything. And honestly, it felt fair. Beth never stopped calling. But I never picked up. She didn't get to rewrite the story now. She'd told it already in her own voice, when she thought I wasn't listening.